Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church, and I'm here today to finish up the week and finish up our conversation about joy. Now, remember, I started out by saying joy is an attitude of the heart. It's an attitude based on a choice. You and I can think about different things. We can focus on the things that are hurtful, or we can focus on the things that are loving and kind. At any moment, we can choose where our minds are going. And when our mind is aligned with our heart that finds joy as the ultimate possession to have, well, that changes our lives. Now, let me read a passage to you for this last day from Habakkuk, chapter 3 and verse 17. I know you probably don't read this little fellow very often, but maybe you should. It reads this way: even though the fig trees have no blossoms, and there are no grapes in the vines, even though the olive crop fails, and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields, and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Well, if you want to think of somebody that's got bad circumstances, this is it. I mean, nothing is working in his life. Absolutely nothing. Everything that could possibly give meaning and purpose and contribute to his welfare and income and livelihood are gone. Everything. Now, I would submit that most of us aren't in that situation. We may be hurting and we may be struggling, but we're not that far down. Well, okay, maybe there are a couple of you who are. And if so, this will give you heart because you're not alone and you're not the first one, nor will you be the last. So listen to what it says. Even though the fig tree has no blossoms, well, I guess you know that without blossoms, you don't get any fruit. That's what happens when a late frost hits. Trees start to bloom, frost hits, destroys the bloom, no fruit. Now, sometimes you get a few off the tree, you get a little bit of product, but in this case, it says, even though the fig tree has no blossoms, which means there is not going to be any fruit on all those fig trees. And there are no grapes on the vines. Well, I've never grown grapes. I've been around grapevines, and they grow on those vines. And if there's nothing on them, those vines are just, well, vines. You can't eat a vine. Maybe a cow can. You and I can't. And even though the olive crop fails, well, now we've lost the blossoms on the trees, we've lost the grapes on the vines, and now the olive crop fails. It's like, what can go on next? What can happen next? Well, it goes on. And the fields be empty and barren. Well, if the fields are empty and barren, you and I are going to go hungry, folks. I mean, there's no getting around this. God's got to work a miracle or we're in big trouble. And then it goes, even though the flocks in the field die, ooh, and the cattle barns are empty. Wow. This passage basically says, even if everything imaginable goes wrong. Now, you and I probably have never been in a spot where everything went wrong. I can't even fathom what that's like. My mind cannot understand a situation where absolutely, totally everything goes wrong. But let's assume that we can conceive of that. And the passage says, Habakkuk says, yet, okay, even in spite of, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful to the God of my salvation. Now think about it. How in the world can you pull that one off? Well, I have a suggestion. Habakkuk understands that all of the things that we have really don't count for a whole lot. Now, yeah, they're important. Food, sustenance, that's critical if we're going to live in this world. But maybe our focus should be somewhere else. When our focus is only on what's happening to me today, think of how small of a vision that is. Think about all of the other things that are left out of that picture. Think of God who created the universe in the midst of us focusing on only our specific wants and desires. Well, Habakkuk figures out this equation. He really does. And he lays out a scenario that's about as bleak as you can get. But in the midst of that bleak scenario, he says, yet I'll rejoice. Because joy is an act of the heart, it's a decision of the will. Let me say that again. You and I choose to be joyful or not to be. I didn't say it was easy, but I'm saying it's really simple. It's just complicated. But yet, you and I, who live in a world very different and very unlikely to be as totality losing everything that Habakkuk talks about, even though you and I have things go wrong, if he can rejoice, if he can choose to rejoice, so can you and me. Yep, that's the way it is. I hope you think about it. Let the God of the universe guide your heart into seeing the blessings you have instead of the lackings that you might have. Well, thanks so much for listening this week. I'll be back next week. Hope you have a really great weekend. If you have a need or a concern, let us know. We'll do whatever we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. God bless you. I'll talk to you again.